Namaste and good afternoon. I think it's a very great opportunity for all of us to have these eminent scholars with us here and to understand a few things, particularly on climate change and let's say global cities, right? So we are very lucky in that sense, and thank you very much for NIS to organizing and giving me this opportunity here. I think the topic of climate change is a hot topic today. Everywhere, every development issue is climate change. It's there, right? Everywhere. It connects with our life, everyday life, how we practice our lifestyle. It connects with that, and it connects with economic system, right? And there are different debates of North and South also. But today, particularly, I think we are going to focus on South Asian issues. Okay, on the one hand. On the other hand, if you look at global trend of urbanization, currently also over 55% of global population they live in cities now, right? And by 2050, let's say this number is going to increase up to 70 to 80%. Okay, so the world is getting urbanized. In the past, we did not have any cities. Now we have cities, small cities getting, mid-sized cities getting into larger cities. And some cities are turning into global cities also now. So I think with these two professors, one is going to talk on climate change issues, particularly focusing on South Asia. Another one is talking about, I think, global cities, comparing three different global cities of the world. Okay. Now let me introduce these two distinguished speakers here today, and then we can move ahead. So what we can do is, I think, in terms of process, what we can do is we have first presentation, and we can have a discussion session, and then we can have second presentation, because one is on particularly climate change in South Asia, another one is on global cities, although they are related indirectly, but I think after one session is over, we can move to another session. And these two speakers, Professor Daniel Suman, right? He's a professor of marine policy and coastal management at Rosenthal School of Marine and Atmospheric Science of the University of Miami. His research and project areas focus on coastal management, adaptation to climate change, sea level rise, governance of marine resources in space, management of mangroves and coastal wetlands, and marine protected areas, particularly in Latin America but worldwide. Suman earned a PhD in oceanography from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, University of California, San Diego, and a law degree from University of California, Berkeley. At the University of Miami, he has taught courses of 27 years in environmental law, environmental planning, coastal management, coastal law, and water resources policy. So reading this biography, I can see that he has broad understanding about oceanography, issues of oceanography, climate change, right? And it appears very clear that his focus is on Latin America, at the same time global focus as well. So today we expect quite a lot about South Asian issues. Okay. And we have another professor here, Professor Ariel C. Harmony, leads the University of Pittsburgh Global Engagement and the Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs and directs the University Center for International Studies, home to university's top-ranked thematic and area studies center. He also holds faculty appointments in the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the Department of Political Science, in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Harmony's work has been published in leading journals in the United States, Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, and China. He has published nearly 20 books and special issues. His book, The Dubious Link, Civil Engagement and Democratization, Stanford University Press, 2004, was a University Press bestseller. Harmony's latest book is The Global Age, Miami in the 21st Century, the University of California Press, 2018, co-authored with Aleja Do Ports. Harmony is a frequent commentator for US and international media, most recently on the topics of the changing role of China in Latin America, the globalization of cities, and innovation in international education. His research areas also include democratization, civil society, human rights topics. Before arriving at Pitt, Harmony led the University of Miami's Institute for Advanced Study of the Americas. He's been a Fulbright Scholar, Rockefeller Foundation Scholar, and Residential Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars Moni earned a PhD from University of Pittsburgh, Department of Political Science, and a certificate in Latin American Studies from one of the fifth centers that he now directs. Right? So he graduated and he is now directing the same institute. It's great. So we have two prominent speakers here. Now let me invite first of all Professor Daniel Osuman to give his presentation on climate change vulnerabilities in South Asia. Please, your turn. Yeah, almost. Yeah. 20 to 30 minutes would be fine, I think. Yeah, 30 minutes. Good.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting us. Yeah, it's a great honor for us to be here. So I'd like to talk a little bit about climate change, and I know probably many of you are experts, so forgive me if I repeat a lot of issues that you already know. Climate change, can't really see, but we start with drivers of climate change and the physical changes, which will be increase in temperature, changes in rainfall, precipitation, sea level rise, which doesn't affect you, luckily, ocean acidification, which doesn't affect you, and extreme events, which does affect you. Right? And these physical changes have effects on society, on many different sectors, on agriculture, on settlements, infrastructure, on ecosystems, on health, and of course water resources. And socioeconomic development also gives us information about how different countries and societies are able to respond to these changes. We can mitigate and reduce greenhouse gases or adapt to these changes.
You got my business.
And make it full.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that.
So I'm not sure you're all familiar with greenhouse greenhouse gases and how they are increasing much toward the present. Now the most important greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, and now the concentration in the atmosphere is over 400 parts per million, and increasing, and of course methane as well, and nitrous oxides. Next. So unfortunately we're not doing well, we're going backwards because the emissions per capita are increasing compared to 1990 and compared to 2010. So we're not doing very well controlling our greenhouse gas emissions. Next. Yeah. And of course, as we all know, the emissions come from rich countries, mostly, and even within a country, the emissions are disproportionately emitted by richer households, richer groups in each country. So for instance, homes with the lowest 50% of income in the world only contribute about 15% of greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, most of these homes are in what we used to call the third world or global south, or Latin America, Africa, and Asia, South Asia. And Nepal, of course, seriously impacted by climate change, many different impacts as we'll discuss, but the emissions of greenhouse gases are negligible in Nepal, only 0.1% of total greenhouse gas emissions, mostly from agriculture. And again, as we already know, here we see responsibility by region in tons of greenhouse gas, tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per capita, per person. And of course, US, North America, US and Canada, and Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and EU, European countries are the highest, and South Asia, while having a large population, per capita emits a very small amount of greenhouse gases. Yeah. So the physical impacts, number one, I think will be increase in temperature. Also melting of glaciers and polar ice caps. Sea level rise, change in rainfall, precipitation, extreme events, extreme climate events, and changes in ocean current, which you don't think affects you, but will affect the whole world as far as global climate is concerned. Because the ocean currents determine the global climate. Next. So, beginning with temperature, but first of all, you're probably familiar with RCP, no? Yeah. From IPC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. But there's another pathway called SSP, Future Shared Socioeconomic Pathways. It's similar to concentration pathways because, of course, there's much uncertainty as we go into the future. And we can have low emissions, which is, SSP 1 to 2.6, which is the green road, assuming that we reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Or at the other extreme, SSP 5 to 8.5, development based on fossil fuels, so no change at all. And then we have some intermediate scenarios. So temperature increase, all the scenarios predict an increase in temperature all over the world, especially in the pole, in the north. Especially in the pole. This is hard to see, but the darker red, the darker color, are greater increases in temperature. So right in the middle here is 0, and this is decrease in temperature, which doesn't occur. So everywhere will have an increase in temperature, including Nepal, right, and the Himalaya regions. So here are predictions. IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, predictions for different scenarios into the future, and whether we're talking about 2040 to 2060 or 2080 to 2100, we see an increase in temperature, average daily temperature, over what we have today. You can imagine even a 1.5 degree increase in temperature is very significant, although we hope that temperature will not increase above 1.5, right? And can't really see, but heat waves defined as 3 or more days when the temperature has a 95% probability of exceeding the daily average temperature. And for Nepal, this is data from Nepal from Asia Development Bank country risk profile. So for the worst scenario, by 2090, there's a 27% daily probability of a heat wave. So 1 in 4 probability of a heat wave by the end of the century. And this is also from the ADB report. And of course, the Terai region has the greatest risk of increased temperature. Of course, the lowland on the southern border. Glacial melt and ice caps, but also glaciers, high mountain glaciers, are in all cases, this is from IPCC Atlas, Interactive Atlas, experiencing melt throughout the world, and areas that are darkened there, can't really see with the light, but this is India, and this is Tibetan region, mountain region, so Nepal is there. So high confidence of melting glaciers, decreasing glaciers. This is not a picture of Nepal, but Peru, also in Andes. And you can see, as we note here in Nepal as well, the retrocession of glaciers from 1978 to 30 years later in 2011, and it's the same here, of course. And the prediction is that there will be a great loss of glacial ice, which has great effects, of course, for water resources. I'm sure you're all familiar with GLOF, glacial outburst floods. And there are so many places in the Himalayas. There are over 1,000 lakes, glacial lakes. They're new, really since about 1950 as temperatures have increased. And the danger, of course, is that when the moraine breaks, then the water will be released into the valley and floods can occur downriver, which has certainly occurred next. Certainly occurred. And of course, you're all familiar with this from, let's see, Gombatonsha Lake Breach a few years ago, and there have been many other incidences in China and Nepal, and India as well. You don't care about sea level rise projections, but we do in Miami because it's a very low-lying city. Well, in like Bangladesh as well, too. We predict that major areas will be flooded. We're already experiencing flooding now because of sea level rise increases, and of course, as we go into the future, the uncertainty increases a lot. But this certainly will be a major problem for Miami, for Dhaka, for Shanghai, for New York, for London, for many coastal cities throughout the world. Changes in precipitation. Some areas will be drier. Around Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean, North, South America, and around the Mediterranean, we expect much less rain. But actually in India and China and Nepal, expect an increase, in Nepal a slight increase in precipitation and rainfall. And this is from the IPCC Atlas, precipitation estimates from 2040 to 2060 based on a medium scenario, which is quite realistic. And the green indicates increasing rainfall, and you certainly see that along the Pacific, equatorial Pacific, and in the Sahel of Africa, which will be quite significant, and also in India and Nepal, in China too. So there'll be a slight increase in precipitation here. Slight, maybe 5 to 10% increase in precipitation, with more at higher elevations. Winters should be drier, and monsoon summers will be wetter, but also there'll be more extreme climate events. So more intense rainfall in a given period of time, and longer periods of drought. And I certainly think that we're experiencing that now. Here, you don't really care so much about cyclones, typhoons, as Bangladesh, for instance, in India, and the Caribbean and Miami too. But with increasing temperature of the surface sea level, there'll be more water vapor in the atmosphere, which can generate stronger cyclones, typhoons, more intense typhoons, and a greater number of typhoons. Intense rainfall and flooding, extreme climatic events. The darker colors here, there's a map of the world under there, you can't really see. But you do see India and then above Nepal. So this is an area where there should be increasing extreme climatic events, increased flooding, of course, with all of that implies effects on people, infrastructure, agriculture, water generation. So sectoral impacts, and I break it down this way: ecosystems, biodiversity, water, resources, agriculture, health, and then infrastructure and settlements. So ecosystems, we have to remember that climate impacts have to be combined with other problems that humans are causing. Overexploitation of forests and fish. Rapid urbanization. I was here 50 years ago, and this was all around Patan was fields, and it was green. And there were fields between Kathmandu and Patan, and now it's all one. So we've lost habitat, but all over the world, all over Nepal too, and pollution, of course. So these have to be combined with the environmental changes. And these are conclusions from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 6th assessment report. High levels of confidence. Extreme climatic events are surpassing the resiliency and adaptive capacity of many natural systems and human systems as well. It will take a long time to fix this problem if we ever can. There's a risk of extinction, of loss of biodiversity and extinction of many species throughout the world. We already see increasing exotic species throughout the world, here as well. And interestingly enough, there'll be a shift of many ecosystems to the north and south, or up to higher elevations, and this would be the case here. So some forest ecosystems, pine forests, are already shifting to higher elevations that are getting warmer. And here we're losing it's kind of alpine or Himalayan ecosystems, high elevation without trees. Of course, the forests are so important in Nepal for so many ecosystem services, but they're also being impacted by all of these climate events. Erosion due to bad forest management, deforestation, drought, fires, and general biodiversity loss. Water resources, of course, with increasing temperature and decreasing snow cover, glacial cover, we can expect major changes to the hydrological cycle in Nepal. Changes in duration, intensity, volume of water. And think of all the important uses of water, not only for drinking, for potable water, but for generation of electricity, small hydro dams, hydropower dams, and irrigation for agriculture. So all of these different sectors can be seriously impacted by changes in hydrology, but your glaciers in Himalayas are important not only for Nepal, but also for India, for Ganga, for the Ganges River Basin, for maybe 500 million people who live in northern India and Bangladesh as well. So in food security, we can expect changes. There's a lot of uncertainty about this, but many people predict that there will be decreasing yields of wheat, of maize, and rice, with increasing temperature because of heat stress and changes in precipitation. So this leads to potential grave problems with food, potentially with food security. Yes. This is important from an interesting paper here, Environmental Research Letters. And you can't see the line, but this is no change going across here. And this is increased yields, and this is decreased yields for many different regions in the world. And you can't see now, but China, India, other Asia, and Southeast Asia. So we only see increasing yields predictions for sugarcane, and decreasing yields for everything else, wheat, rice, grains, oil seeds, and only increases for sugar. So it can be very sweet, but obviously not an important food stuff, a food product. Health impacts are great. The thermal stress, increasing temperatures, seriously will affect vulnerable people, older people, and young infants. There are many impacts on health impacts from the extreme weather events, from landslides and flooding, obviously. As the temperature is increasing, then the range for vector-borne insects, vector-borne diseases will increase. Dengue, malaria, Zika. With changes in not only climate, but also how people have destroyed the habitat and are destroying the habitat, natural habitat, and are affecting the whole ecosystem. We see arguably pandemics, increasing pandemics, for instance, COVID, which most likely has an origin, as we all know, right, from bats and then the transmission to humans. degradation of water quality and air quality as well. And in the United States, many people talk about climate stress and sort of a psychological impact from all this discussion about changing climate. Students especially are a little bit worried about this. Here I just wanted to point out that along with our human activities that are still continuing to burn biomass, wood, and agricultural products and fossil fuels, then we will see increases in small particulate matter, air particles in the air that are less than 2.5 microns, so very small but have serious health impact and can pass into the lungs. And ozone as well. Well, we all know this problem here, and in the whole north of India and Nepal, southern Nepal too. And here, this is another projection from the IPCC, and I can't remember what scenario, it doesn't really matter, but the green areas are decreases in particulate matter, so that's progress, and what is purple are areas where there is an increase in particulate matter into the future, and I believe this is 2040 to 2060. And you can see, we see areas where there will be increase in small particulate matter, which would be Central Africa, from Nigeria to Kenya, and India and Nepal, so here, which is not good news for human health, right? And of course, with the extreme climate events, we know that Nepal is seriously at risk from flooding, especially in the Terai, in the lowlands, and landslide risks everywhere, especially in the mountains, with major economic impacts as well, and agricultural impacts, loss of not only life, but also infrastructure and settlements as well. So, don't really care about sea level rise, but in Dhaka, for instance, or in the Sundarbans, then we can expect increasing coastal erosion, flooding of low-lying areas with salt water, salinization of groundwater, and of course many people in coastal areas get their potable water, their drinking water from wells that are becoming more saline. And forest fires with drier conditions in the winter. Here we can expect more fires as well, and many other places have a greater certainty of this in the world, especially North America, the west part of North America, and the Amazon basin in South America. And social vulnerability, we all know that vulnerability is a product of not only of exposure, exposition, but also sensitivity, and then adaptive capacity. So we have to take these three issues into account. Next. Yeah, and there are so many things to think about if you're doing a study, but exposition is the land low? Is it mountainous? Are there more frequent storms? Are there major changes in rainfall, in precipitation, or snowfall? Is it a small island developing states like in the Pacific, South Pacific? Is it higher elevation or toward the poles? So these are all exposition factors, but there are sensitivity factors too. What's the population density? What is the dependency of the population on agriculture or on fishing or some economic sector? Then they're more sensitive to changes. Cultural norms, the value of real estate infrastructure. So for instance, we study Miami, and Miami is one of the cities most impacted by sea level rise. But one of the reasons is the high value of real estate, the high value of property, right? Actually, Dhaka is at higher risk, but the value of houses and infrastructure is not as great. So anyway, that's another important factor. Poverty, inequality, human health, education. Adaptive capacity also can minimize, can reduce some of the impacts, depending on social social capital, trust in the different sectors in society, technology, equity, equality, financial resources, technology that's available, innovation, and of course a level of socioeconomic development. So just thinking a little bit about Nepal, and I don't know much, but I know you do. So exposition, some factors are increasing temperature, melting of glaciers, right? More intense rainfall, and a drier winter season, dry season. Increasing frequency of high rainfall events, extreme events, variability of the monsoons, fragile mountain topography and ecosystems, flooding, landslides, GLOF, glacier outburst flooding, and then on top of it, a non-climate impact will be earthquake events, which can affect everything. So Nepal is really vulnerable. And thinking a little bit about sensitivity and adaptive capacity, you can add a lot, but unplanned settlements, high levels of poverty, high dependence on agriculture. So adverse impacts on agriculture can have a big effect on food security and society. Absence of resilient infrastructure. Who will experience the impacts most? Women, indigenous people, and poorer people in rural areas especially. I think, maybe some of you will know much better than I do, environment ministries always have a relatively weak position in the government in most countries, right? I assume this is the case here. And limited financial resources to respond to disasters. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with German Watch, an NGO that publishes a ranking of countries by climate risk. 180 countries over 2 decades, 2000 to 2019. And they make assumptions, but the calculation is based on number of deaths during disasters, economic losses, and losses per unit GDP. And number 10 on the list of 180 countries is Nepal, right? Number 10. Myanmar, also in South Asia, Southeast Asia. Number 2, Bangladesh, number 7, not surprising, and Thailand, 2, I guess is surprising to me, and Nepal, number 10. This is a map that just, the darker countries have higher risk, and you can see India, Pakistan, Myanmar, Nepal, Thailand, Malagasy, Mozambique, and Germany, but I don't know, we have to look into that. I don't know why. So, at risk, you can imagine communities at risk will be the poorest, more vulnerable groups in a society. Women, indigenous communities, poor rural areas. At the same time, they experience greater loss and damages, and that has a feedback loop, and then increases inequality even more. So, we have this a feedback situation. Another way to think about this, I'm almost finished now, is eco-security. Some places use this concept of eco-security, ecological security. And we want to think, what is the relationship between climate change impacts and national security? If we're talking about damages to roads, infrastructure, if we're talking about displacement of people because of flooding and landslides, if we're talking about disasters, but then the response from government is not satisfactory. If we're talking about migration of people due to economic reasons or environmental reasons as well. And of course, Nepal has a lot of experience with that. Mostly economic reasons, but you can't separate them, economic or climate, environmental. We expect that by 2050, there'll be almost 150 million climate refugees in the world. Yeah. So threats to humans, to food security and public health that I've already mentioned. Increasing internal conflicts and in some cases external conflicts over natural resources. Maybe India, Pakistan over water. or in the Middle East as well, because of areas with uh, water scarcity, or United States, Mexico also, or even United States within the Southwest states have great conflict over water from the Colorado River. Degradation of ecosystems and all the benefits that they provide, and then threats to political security. So anyway, one bright note is the recent UN General Assembly resolution just 6 weeks ago that is just a recommendation to the ICJ, the World Court, International Court of Justice, that recommends that the ICJ emit an advisory opinion on states' obligations to address climate change. Of course, it would be non-binding. And states' actions and failures have caused this problem, especially to Nepal, to small island developing states, to Bangladesh, and many countries throughout the world. And of course, United States and China and India too have great responsibility and have not done, we're waiting to see these countries do more and implement the promises that they have made or haven't made in the climate change conventions. But certainly the people that have contributed least are those who experience the greatest impacts. And recommendations, everyone, all sectors must think proactively about climate change and include adaptation measures to try to reduce the impacts of climate change, and as well mitigation to attempt to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from all their activities. I think that's it. Yes. So thank you very much.
Please, have your seat. Thank you very much for your comprehensive presentation on climate change vulnerabilities in South Asia, Professor Suman. I think you have captured a lot of things, global scenario, South Asian scenario, and Nepali cases also. And I found it very much interesting, and I hope our audience, who also come from diverse background, and I think our audience are also eminent scholars here as well, right? They must have some kind of reactions with them. We will go to listen to those reactions also. But as I teach a course called Climate Change and Development, I begin my course itself by saying that we are talking about climate change, but it's not natural climate change, it's anthropogenic climate change, first of all. I take note of that. And I begin my course again by saying to my student that development causes climate change, and climate change affects development. Right? Development causes climate change, and climate change affects development. Right? This is how I begin. And there are lots of things which I would like to say at the end when I summarize. But now let's open the floor and listen to questions from our audience so that you can respond to them. Please. Okay. Okay, ladies first.
Thank you, Professor Suman, for such a rich presentation. You talked about women and marginalized groups who are vulnerable to climate change, right, in Nepal. So can you please elaborate more on how women and marginalized groups in Nepal or overall in South Asia are affected by climate change? My one question is this. Second is, I have been working in the area of migration, so I would relate climate change to migration as well. So how does climate change affect the migration process if we look it from the gender perspective? And my third question is, in the Tarai region of Nepal, people are mostly dependent on the tube wells for their drinking water. So how will the climate change affect the groundwater supply, and how it will affect the water supply of people living in Tarai region? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll see if I can answer. Maybe my other people can answer better than I can. But I think I can remember the last question first. So I think in the Terai, if Many people get their potable water from wells. Then with the increasing dry season, then the water level will be lower, and it will be more difficult to obtain water, more expensive. The wells will have to go deeper. And I'm supposing that there's also conflict with agriculture, pumping water for agriculture. Maybe, I don't know. So we could have that conflict between drinking water and water for irrigation. So anyway, but those are some of my thoughts about that. And then I'm sure maybe other people have experience. And then as far as women, I think from my observation that women are more involved in small-scale agriculture here for cultural reasons and because many men have gone to work outside Nepal. So women generally, probably throughout the world, and I'm guessing here, have less access to credit, agricultural credit, money, finances, have less security for land tenure, and perhaps have less availability to adapt to newer technologies, I'm guessing. And newer technologies might be different seeds that are more resistant to climate events. What was the other question? The middle one. Gender perspective.
Migration.
Oh, migration and gender perspective. Can you ask that one again, please?
How climate change impacts migration if you look it from the gender perspectives, women migrants and other
Yeah. I don't know. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about that or other people. But in Nepal, certainly the biggest migration, millions of people, are mostly men who are leaving, right? And that's not necessarily for climate. Perhaps somehow it's because of natural disasters, but more economic reasons and poverty reasons. But I think we can't separate climate from out migration from emigration. A similar situation, different but somewhat similar in the Western Hemisphere, is Haiti, which was it in the top 10? But anyway, it's a serious situation for political reasons, but for environmental reasons, economic reasons, everything. And we see tremendous out-migration of people from Haiti, trying to improve their livelihoods. We can't separate climate from that. I don't know. I'm really curious what you think about that, because I know you must have an idea.
we can relate it more to food security.
Food security.
For food security reason, people mostly travel from one country to one place to another place, and in that process, migration can be impacted.
Right.
So I would like to add, because since climate change highly impacts disaster and how disaster is disaster occur in any country or any region. So due to these disasters, many people are displaced, and that is also how these women and children are mostly affected by climate change. Also because climate change directly impacts disaster, which impacts the migration.
Right. Yes.
Can I add on that part? Can
Please.
I add?
Sure. You can introduce yourself also, please.
Yeah, my name is Abdul Ansari. I work in Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations as a Green Climate Fund project, especially for the Churia landscape. So that I'm working in the areas you raised your question. Just let me try to answer your question. That is very, very important. I also born in the Tarai, in the areas, and if we analyze the water availability, just 20 years back or 15 years back, it was my family was getting water at 30 feet, right, in the periods. But now that is going down and down and up to 400 feet in Janakpur and 350 feet in Birgaj. This is the very current data I am giving you. What is the reason for this? The reason is the Churia landscape that comprises three land masses, At the top, on the north side, that is the Churia hills, and in between the Churia hills and the upper there is the Bhabar region, and Dun Valley in some areas, in some districts, Dang and Sindhuri and Udaipur, Dun Valley. Then comes the upper Tarai. The aquifer of the lowland Tarai is linked with the Churia landscape. So with the coming of climate change impacts, I would say, especially the forest fires. If you see the frequency of the forest fires, present day time of frequency of the forest fires, that is very, very alarming. And then flooding, and then you see sudden rainfall. We received the monsoon starts in the eastern Churia during the four months. That starts in June, July, August, September, right? We receive very, very intense and sporadic rainfall, and more rainfall in a shorter period of time. Then what happens? Our rivers that carry that river, there is no forest cover intact in the Bhabar region. 55% of the areas are now having new settlements. Sukumasiharu, highways, infrastructures, these are the things which our 4 months rainfall is not getting infiltrated right into the soil. That's why our rivers, I'm working the 26 river systems, so that our rivers carry more and more water that doesn't get percolated right in the Bhabar region, so that the aquifer can be connected right to the Tarai. So that my project, FAO project, is trying to fill up those vacant areas which were in 20 years, 30 years back the forest. We are trying to put up the fast growing species, especially the fibrous species, soil binding species, so that the monsoonal rain can be filtrated right there, and our aquifer will be refurbished, repaired, so that we will have more water as we are getting 20 years back. This is the one question. And second is the why Tarai is, not only the what problem is the food security, as Dr. Daniel presented. There is a more challenge for the food security in Tarai, not for the drinking water but the irrigation water also. That is going down and down. People cannot use the heavy equipments to draw the water, so that our project is focusing more and more how to mitigate the floods, how to give the more and more fast growing species, especially the bamboos, vetiver type species, so that the people can get both income as well as ecosystem restoration can be done at the same time. So in this way we are trying something.
Okay.
Hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Would you like to make a response? Okay, please be sweet and short.
I'm Vidya Dasaman and I work at Accountability Lab, and our organization produced one movie related to climate change, and that addresses the issue of indigenous community. We have this fisherman community of Maji in Nepal, right? And those fishermen are affected by climate change because there is, lack of decline of numbers of fish in the river. So in that way, the livelihood is affected. So that is how the climate change has, affected the marginalized community, indigenous community. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to second question.
Hello, I'm Navin. I have only one question, and thank you for your presentations. And I would like to know, increasing population is increasing climate change, yeah? So why no people talk about increasing population of animals due to animal husbandry and big animal industries, dairy farming industries, fishing industries, and so many hens, chickens, and so on. So why no people talk about these things? regarding climate change. I want to know more about it. Thank you.
I think people do talk about this animal
I
husbandry.
listen very less.
Yeah.
We see very less people like sincere on this topic.
Um,
So,
because,
what-
well, especially cattle, and are responsible in many parts of the world for deforestation in Africa and Latin America. One of the major causes of deforestation to remove forest for pasture. So also you think of the environmental cost of meat, of raising, one cattle or whatever, and the 1/10 of the environmental cost for being a vegetarian or not eating meat, right? So there's a movement in many countries of being a vegetarian to protect the environment as well. So I think that it is a concern, and many people are looking at this. The problems with concentrated animal husbandry, which also creates many pollution problems too, right? From chickens to everything. Tremendous environmental problem to rivers and lakes.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Okay, so my name is Nadita Curtis. So I have a question is like our topic is related more about climate change and vulnerability in South Asia. So when you talk about South Asia, being more vulnerable countries are the Himalayan countries such as Nepal and Bhutan, which are very vulnerable to climate changes and they produce least, or say they emit least carbon. So when the question is coming like by 2025 it says like Nepal would be trading like 9 million tons of carbon emission by 2025 with $5 per ton. So when we talk about this, like this voluntary carbon market, so how does this, like does it affect, or because we are not the ones to contribute in climate changes, but we are being affected. So do you think like voluntary carbon market or the carbon trading that has been done, that is creating more vulnerabilities to these countries? How would you say?
Well, I want to ask you, why do you think it could be causing more vulnerabilities? It's a very controversial topic, right, carbon trading, but is quite trendy. And you could see possible benefits, right, for reforestation or protecting forests that are already existing, and then Nepal receiving, selling those carbon credits to the voluntary market, or maybe not even a voluntary market in the future, right? And then receiving funds for environmental protection in some way, maybe directly to communities or to the government. But that's one area of contribution, because if the forests belong to the nation, then the funds received might go to the nation and not directly to the communities that are living there or responsible for protecting the resource. And there's also a debate from indigenous communities about carbon markets, because the fear is that a talk about protecting the parks or protecting forests at the expense of indigenous groups, right, who will not be allowed to continue with their traditional uses of the forest. So at the COP, the last one, there are many sessions from indigenous groups really criticizing carbon markets and saying they will not benefit indigenous peoples. So I wonder, are there any carbon markets? Does Nepal sell any carbon credits on the voluntary carbon market?
We do that. We do trade carbons, right? So we get funds. But the question arises is like we are trading, we are selling, or they're doing a training protest. But the question is, does it help to change the climate, or does it help to give some contribution to bring the climate to the previous factors? It's like we are having a lot of climate changes. Because in Kathmandu we experience like this monsoon in this times. It's not a monsoon season, but we are experiencing it. We are treading it, but we are getting funded. But what is that? Is that contributing, or is that helping these nations, mostly on the Himalayan regions, to cope up with these vulnerable changes or not? It also has a question about its future existence as well.
Exactly. So we have to ask what happens to the funds that are received, right, by Nepal. How are those funds used? For what projects? Who benefits from those funds? That's a very good question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. My one sweet and short answer, we have answered that question long time back in 2016. If you read my book called Why Red, R-E-E-R-E-D-D, Red Will Fail.
Yes.
Okay, read that book, you will get the answer.
Yeah.
Please, next one.
Can I just come on the carbon trading stuff?
Just a minute, actually.
Can we just make some few remarks? As you said that Nepal is not affected by the sea level rise, but are we considering the fact that when Bangladesh sinks inside the sea, then the Bangladesh will migrate out, and we have already seen the Rohingya crisis in Nepal. We have been scared of it. Now the Bangladeshi migrant crisis can affect Nepal in a very brutal way because they are ready to work at cheaper cost, and at present the Bihari work migrations have slowly becoming more xenophobic in Nepalese society, and that may even rise further. That's the first thing. And second thing is we are no longer, till this year we are not a very industrialized country. And till 1990 we only had 3 cement factories. Now there are 124 cement factories in this country. So when we're talking about this climate change, we didn't got an opportunity to industrialize like 30 or 40 years back. Now we're industrializing. So one of our biggest resource, limestone, and one of our biggest potential to export cement is now, I was saying, okay, what will we do to industrialize our country? Because if we cannot use our resource, that will be a problem for ourselves. That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's always the eternal debate, right? About development and the need to development that many countries have, believe they have a right to develop. And it's the rich countries, Europe, North America, Japan, that have caused the problem, caused most of the problem, have developed at the expense of the rest of the world, right? And now they're saying, no, you can't do that. So this is the eternal problem, the eternal conflict.
We can keep debating on that, right? Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I'm Yugan. I'm with the British Embassy. I just wanted to come back on your question on carbon trading. Basically the carbon trading was basically an innovative financing tool. That was actually made for countries that are more polluting in terms of developing countries. So when carbon markets came into play, it was meant for developing countries. And who captured the carbon markets was basically India, Brazil, China, Indonesia, and South Africa were the major countries that captured the carbon markets. But for countries like us, we just have small scope, because we don't have an emitting baseline. But it's an innovative tool in terms that at least we can capture some form of carbon financing. There are other issues like linked with indigenous peoples, and the government said that they will give 80% of carbon financing to the local communities, but now they're again debating whether they should only give 60% or 40%, So these things are still there. But definitely carbon market is like, I call it the yin-yang sign, It might have a good thing, but there's a small other color to it, I mean, we call it like that in similar language, but as in the Paris Agreement, things are becoming more stricter, so you have to ensure that your carbon credits ensure environmental integrity is going to be key, Because in some time when I was engaged in carbon markets, in countries like China, how can you monitor China? It's such a big country. You can just have a baseline in one country, you can put a diesel generator in one country, you can take the same old diesel to another place and say this generator is working there for 25 years. You can create an artificial baseline. So those are wrong things that really happen in the carbon markets. But now they're trying to look into environmental integrity. So carbon markets worked for like 10 years to 21 years in the earlier CDM projects. But under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, it only works for 5 years maximum. And you might have forestry projects that go up to 30 years. So in that way, they're trying to reduce your carbon dependence on carbon markets per se, but it's an innovative tool, you know. But for example, if Nepal didn't take the forestry into carbon markets, where would it get money to save forests? You know, so right now it's getting funds for a program called LEAF. I don't know if you've heard of it, lowering emissions by accelerating forest finance. It's supported by the UK government. But again, out there, you know, like if you're getting a baseline of $10, you know, but if you can contribute your emission targets, but you have to meet your targets first under NDCs. But if you can then sell that, you can get up $30, you know. But now the accounting mechanism is not as it was in the Kyoto Protocol, but it's different in the Paris Agreement, you know. All countries have to meet their targets, then only they can do carbon trading, you know. So this is called the corresponding adjustments that you have to look into. But I agree with you, I mean, the carbon markets are not a solution to solving climate crisis.
All right. All right, let's take the last question.
Well, yeah, I'm Lilian Bubikiewicz. I'm from the German embassy, so one of the great developed countries who caused a lot of this. But yeah, my question would be, I mean, since your focus is Latin America and your research, and I was wondering, I don't know, maybe it's too big of a question, but like, in your research, did you come across any projects or like kind of organizations that did work that could maybe be also interesting for like Nepal in the sense of like how they kind of functioned?
Yeah, I can think of 2 examples, but there are more. And in Peru, in the Amazon, there are a number of community-based projects from indigenous communities that are protecting a forest and are receiving credits from different NGOs. And they're also monitored with cameras, real-time monitoring to ensure that the forest is remaining. Even on my computer here, I have the name of the project. I was recently in Colombia, and on the Caribbean, on the Atlantic coast in Colombia, the Institute for Marine and Natural Resources, IRENA, has a number of community-based mangrove or tropical forest, coastal forest projects that have entered into relationships with communities that are living nearby using the resource, and they are receiving some of the funds that they are obtaining from carbon markets to Colombia. And this is one of the conflicts because, of course, mangroves, the tropical forests, are public. They can't be privatized. So one issue is always, how will the funding go to support the local communities? So I asked that question, and they told me, well, 50% goes to public health clinic, to schools, to community development projects. So there's some accounting for the use of the funds received from those carbon markets. Those are a few of the examples that I know. Colombia and Peru, Ecuador as well, I think there are some good examples there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Simon. Sorry, Professor Simon, for responding to all the questions. I think it's interesting when you talk about climate change. Because climate change science is clear, right? We don't have any issue with that, but politics is not clear. And the discussion here was about the politics, right? Burden sharing, who's going to share the burden, right? For example, North-South politics, okay? But then if you look at, UNFCCC Convention of 1992, Kyoto Protocol, Copenhagen, Paris Agreement of 2015, we are way out there. But how we have been honestly able to implement those things in reality, that is always in question. In terms of $100 billion funding for mitigation and adaptation, right? And then channeling that fund to those most needy countries, whether it can be like Pole Island or Bangladesh or Maldives or Nepal or any other country, right? With these kinds of issues there, and you can keep on debating on those kinds of things. And in terms of Nepal, obviously, very clearly articulated, like Nepal is one of the most vulnerable countries, and particularly we suffer quite a lot from, glacial melting, because Himalayas are our water towers, right? If we don't have waters, we don't have fresh waters, we cannot live in Nepal. Because our country is still agrarian, although a lot of remittance comes in, but then it's still an agrarian country. So our life is connected with agriculture, water, right? And I said, water is life. If there's no water, life is not possible. And how do we protect our, let's say, the snow-clad mountains from global temperature, which is rising over 1 degree Celsius today? That's a fundamental question for us, one. And second, in the Himalayas, we have this, let's say, melting problem, and in hilly regions, we have landslides problem, and if you go to Tarai region, we have flooding problem there, right? How do we manage flood? But flooding, it's not only Tarai problem now, right? Because of this intensive rainfall, these problems are seen in Kathmandu. Kathmandu city, other cities also. 30 minutes extensive rainfall and the road turns into a flood. We don't have infrastructure that is really adaptive, that is really absorptive. Let's not talk about transformative type of infrastructure. So these are our problems and issues. At the same time, lots of work on adaptations are going on in Nepal also. For example, I'm also involved in a number of projects in which we engage in community level adaptation. For example, he was talking about Tarai region. For example, in Nepal, in the past we used to have ponds everywhere, and these ponds would help recharge, water percolation. And we used to have this stream flows in the past. But because of modern development, what is development again? Because of modern development, if you look, this watershed area of Kathmandu or outside, these days we don't have, these stream waters any longer. We used to have stone spouts in the past, but we don't have water flowing from there today because of this, what do you call that, destructive kind of development, unplanned urbanization, right? Which you may be talking later a lot about it, but then these kinds of things are there. And the idea like adaptations, ideas like climate adaptive recharge pits, depending on soil types, climate adaptive recharge ponds, etc. This can also help, redirect those drying springs as well. And lots of other things, gender issues is there, right? And we do have, climate forced migration in Nepal. We do have that. We have already that evidence in 2010. A particular community with 26 households in Upper Mustang, they had to be shifted to Lower Mustang in 2010. Right? The question is in terms of gender. Obviously, when people are vulnerable, they are going to get most affected. It's very simple with any disaster. It's not only with climate change. Any kind of disaster affects the poorest. Right? Obviously, when somebody is pregnant, somebody has other types of vulnerabilities, people suffer quite a lot in these kinds of things. So we can keep on debating on these things, after this event also. But for now, thank you very much, Professor Suman, for your enlightening talk, and thank you, audience, for your very much interesting questions and your responses. Now let's end with big claps to this session, and we can begin next.